So I have my 2004 Audi TT Quattro with the 6-speed manual. It's a 02M transmission, and we're going to be replacing it. So first things first, parking brake on. We're going to jack it up and remove the tires. They're 18 mils lug nuts. So tires are off. Pop the hood. Going to remove this random cover. Then the next thing we're going to remove is the air box. So there's a plug here. Secondary air injection port that you just kind of squeeze and pull off. We're going to undo this alligator clip with the flathead, and then there are two T27 Torx bolts. So one there and one down there, and then we'll just be able to pull it out. So the air box is out. Next we're going to remove this battery. So I've got 10 mil terminal clamps. Take those off, cut this zip tie, and then there's a 13 mil holding the bracket to hold it down. We should be able to yank out the battery. So we're going to remove the battery tray. There are 4 T27 Torx bolts. And then there's supposed to be these 3 bolts on the cable mounting bracket. So there are 2 right here. They're 13 millimeters. There's supposed to be a third one, which I just can't really see yet. So for now I'm just going to remove these 2. So we're going to remove this little locking washer on the ends here. It's I'm going to get my finger on it right here. We're just going to get a screwdriver in there and try to push it down. There's one final 13 millimeter nut right there, and now I've got a puller. I'm trying to pull this off of the shaft that it was on. I tried by hand and couldn't. So hopefully this, I'm using a 3-jaw puller here. I've got the center threaded onto the shaft, and we'll see if this works. Without popping this out with a 2-jaw puller, and then I found the 3rd bolt for the I don't know, cable mounting bracket. So it's actually not a bolt, it was a nut. So these 2 are the bolts. It was a 13 millimeter nut, and it's kind of, instead of being oriented vertically, it's oriented horizontally back in there. And so now this whole cable shifter deal is totally loose, and I'm going to just try to zip tie it up so it's not dangling. Well, maybe you guys can see real quick. So that's the bolt that this nut was threaded on. So there was a grounding strap back there with a 13 millimeter bolt. Maybe you guys can see that. I removed that. Then there was a little harness connector clip that I removed right there. This big mass of wires kind of just slides on and off this bracket, so I slid it off. Now I'm going to try to remove this top bolt. So there's like really 2 nuts. So there's a nut holding the bracket and then a nut behind that. So we're going to try to get to that nut behind that so we can work more with the starter. A long bolt that held the starter in at the top, it's an 18 mil. So the vehicle speed sensor runs, it's kind of in the back. There's that wire dangling. And so we're going to unplug that, and then if you come, peel back the plastic here in the driver's side fender well, and then here is the reverse light sensor. So we're going to unplug both of these sensors. So I want to remove this headlight leveling sensor, so I'm going to remove it right down here. There's a 10 millimeter bolt. I'm going to work on removing this intercooler pipe that runs along here. So there's some 8 millimeter bolts holding a power steering line to it. Remove the 2 of those. We got to remove these gear clamps, and then way up in here on the driver's side end, there are 3 13 millimeter bolts where this kind of split of the intercooler pipe comes. We're going to remove all that. So here was that the intercooler pipe. So there were actually 2 of these brackets basically with the 13 mil bolts to get off. And now we are going to access that last, what I hope is the last bolt holding this hard power steering line. It's another 13 mil right there. And then this should be pretty loose. And right after that, we'll probably go for the final starter bolt, which is going to be right basically underneath that. So there's the one holding the line, and then here's the one holding the starter. Looks like probably an 18 mil. The starter out, I'm leaving it attached here, but here's where it's attached to the ring terminal. So there's a little 10 mil that I'm going to take out so I can completely pull the starter out of here. Remove the slave cylinder hydraulic line. So basically there's a little clip. My light's right on it. You can see a little fluid on it too. You just pull up with some pliers, and then you can pull the line out. I've got it right here. I just wrap some cloth around it, and that's out. We're underneath looking at the subframe here. So there are 4 of these bolts, so they're 13 mil. Under the steering gearbox, 2 on this side, 2 on this side. We're going to remove these Now I'm back under the car. I've got the engine supported now. We're going to remove this. It's called the dog bone mount. There are two 15mm bolts here and then two 13mm bolts there. So now we're looking at this kind of wishbone. So there are three 15mm bolts. One's already off here, and we're going to remove these on both sides, so driver's and passenger side. I'm at the rear of this subframe. So these two bolts that you can only access from above, you see I'm looking right by an exhaust hanger. 1, 2, they're 13mm. We need to remove this, that way this exhaust hanger can dangle when we remove the subframe. So we're going to have to get probably a wrench to get these. Back at the subframe, so I removed that exhaust hanger and then I put this transmission jack under the subframe. Then there are two 13/16 inch bolts, so one here and one here. Here they are, I already got them out, and then I got to do the other side. And then the subframe should be ready to lower. Lowering the subframe and realize I forgot to disconnect the sway bar links. They're 18mm bolts, and you're going to have to get a wrench to hold it while you turn one side, I'm pretty sure. Or maybe not. I think it's just 18mm bolts. And then I also tied up the steering gear just using some cord and then tied it to this strut so it doesn't dangle too much. So we have this subframe out. So now I'm going to remove the drive shaft. So that's the one going rearward since this is a Quattro. I'm going to use this, it's a 12.10 mil, so I'm going to use this ratcheting wrench and hopefully should be able to just get that out. And then we're going to try to push it like up, like towards high in the Z-axis, that way it's kind of out of the way when we pull everything out, because I'm going to pull the transfer case out with the transmission kind of as one unit. I remove the drive shaft or the axle shafts to stop this from all rotating, so I put in a lug nut or a lug bolt in and then a screwdriver into the rotor. So that way it'll hit the calipers, this way it can't all rotate. With a little bit of getting the jack under there and raising it and lowering it, I was able to get the drive shaft off. So now we're going to work on the two axle shafts. So this one's been replaced before, so there's some normal hex bolts. However, the other side is the original, and there are these weird bolts that I had to buy. They're specifically like a VW thing. So I'm using this M10 12 point. It's almost like a Torx, but I think Torx is a proprietary 6-point. So anyway, we've still got the axle locked up with the screwdriver and the lug bolt. And we're going to remove the 6 bolts on each with this. Both drive shafts are often tied up. On the passenger side, there's a little heat shield. 3 13mm nuts holding this on. Able to get it off pretty easily with just a long extension. So now, again on the passenger side, there's this bracket on the right side here, and we're going to get that off. It's mounted to both the transfer case and the engine. That's why we want to get it off. The assortment of bolts here, there was a 13 mil here, there's a 16 mil at the top, and then there are these 8mm hexes, 1, 2, 3, and 4 that all need to come off. Bracket we just took out, and now there's one more 18mm bolt that we're going to get to on this side. I'll show you where I just got it out from. I had to use a long extension again, but here we are. So it's kind of, so here's where that bracket was, and then here's where that bolt is. It's kind of back a little farther. And now that should be it, other than the actual transmission to engine bolt. So we're going to put a transmission jack under the trans before we start messing with any of those. So some strategizing. So this is the transmission if you were looking at it from the passenger side. So there are 8 bolts. We've already removed number 3, that was the top of the starter, and then number 8, that was the last one. The last thing we just did was remove that. So there are currently 6 bolts. So what I'm going to do first, actually, one more bolt before I put the jack under it is number 7. Just because my transmission jack's going to be right there, so I'm going to get that one out because otherwise it's going to be impossible to access it while it's under there. And then I'm going to do number 6 last. So I'm going to remove 7 now, put the jack under it. Then I'm probably going to go for 1 and 2, and then 4, 5, 6 in that order. And that should hopefully make it come out easier. Also, now that it's on the transmission jack, we would be removing the transmission mount if I had it installed. So the transmission is out finally. It took me, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 hours to go from fully bolted to out. So 2 things. One, I was at the point I definitely would have taken the transfer case off if I could have. The problem is there's a bolt straight in there. I think you need a super long 6mm Allen key, and I just didn't have it, so I couldn't get it out. And then the second thing I want to talk about is there's supposed to be, it's listed in the book, I saw it online, basically a hidden bolt. So the book talks about, it's this final bolt, it's like the second to last step here, it says a bolt above the bevel gear transfer case. It's basically saying it would be somewhere right around here. And I guess it exists on some transmissions, but it definitely did not exist online. But I spent way too much time looking for the bolt that did not exist. But either way, yeah, it's out now. And so I'm probably going to do a clutch job while I'm here. Here I figured I'd also swap the transmission mount. So there are 16mm bolts. This one's very easy to get to. And then these two, it's actually kind of a trick. If you peel off the plastic cover that's holding on this wire loom, there are holes in it so you can get a socket through and access them. So we're going to start on the engine mount on this side, the passenger side. So we've got two gear clamps here and here, two more gear clamps here and here, and then two 13mm bolts to get this charge pipe out. And then after that, we're going to remove, there are some bolts holding in the power steering reservoir and the coolant reservoir. So there's some Phillips head screws. I see a bolt right there, and we're just going to move it out of the way without actually disconnecting it. I know this is going to be hard to see. So here's the part where it mounts to the engine. So there are two 18mm bolts here and here, and then down beneath, probably even harder to see, are some 16mm. So if you look at the new engine block, so these ones here and here are 18mm, and then here and here are 16. So as discussed, we're going to replace the clutch and pressure plate. So I bought this special Audi flywheel lock tool. So you can see it kind of threads in and then it engages the teeth of the flywheel. And now there's 6mm hex bolts around the pressure plate, and we're going to remove those. It says to remove them doing a quarter turn at a time as you go around, but I might just zip them out. Comparison of old clutch versus new clutch. Installing the new transmission, you want to make sure the side that has this German word Getriebesettel, whatever, is facing the transmission, so like that. And then, so we put the new one in. You use this tool that comes with the clutch kit to center it. There are 4 pins. That's one of them. Here's another one. You want to get the pressure plate on, and then I put all the bolts in just hand tight. And now we're going to go around tightening them quarter turn at a time, going in a clockwise pattern until they are at 10 foot-pounds. The bolts are tightened. I'm just going to put some latex gloves on and lubricate the center shaft with the lube that came with it. My transmission back, it's welded. It's a magnesium aluminum alloy, so you have to use a magnesium TIG rod. Anyway, we're going to replace the throwout bearing of the new one right here. So there are 3 9mm bolts, and then we're just going to put this back in, take this cap off and lubricate it with some brake fluid to put it in, and then we're going to torque it down to 11 foot-pounds. So as you can see, magically the transmission is back in. It took me about 6 hours with a friend. No real special trick, just fighting with it, wiggling it, trying to center it. I really honestly can't give you any good advice. Obviously, if it took me 6 hours, maybe shouldn't really be giving advice anyway. But got it in. I've got a bunch of the bolts loosely put in, haven't torqued them down yet. I did align the mount and torque these to, these ones were 44 foot-pounds plus a quarter turn. These were 30 foot-pounds plus a quarter turn. The only other thing I want to say is before I put the transmission in, I filled it up with 2.75 quarts of Redline MT90. Just easier to put it in from when it's out. And I torqued that fill plug, which is down there, up to 32 foot-pounds. So now we're going to go start putting things back together. Next, I torqued all the bolts around the transmission. I'll include pictures with the torque specs. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the steel mounting bracket around the passenger side axle shaft. I'll include a picture for that too. I reinstalled the reverse gear sensor, the vehicle speed sensor in the back, pushed in the clutch line, pushed that little clip down. We're going to have to bleed that, but we'll do that later. I installed the starter, the grounding strap back here, the plug for the starter positive lead, the mounting for this, and then the mounting for both power steering lines and my headlight level sensor bracket. I reinstalled the drive shaft going back, used some Loctite, can only really get them with the wrench, so couldn't torque them. And then I also installed the pipe between the intercoolers, tidied up the power steering line a little more. I think we're ready for the axle shafts. Attaching the axle shafts, tightening to 52 foot-pounds. So I bled the clutch, so you need to make sure that the fluid in the master cylinder is really topped off. It actually pulls from a pretty high up point, so if you see where it sucks in, it's got to be basically completely topped off. And then get a 1/4 inch inner diameter hose from this nipple. I just ran it back over to there, and then had a 9mm wrench that I used to open and close. So I would have the person step on the clutch pedal, open this valve, close this valve, and then have them release the clutch pedal over and over until all the air came out, and you'll see it in that tube. So then with the subframe, so what I would advise is attaching the steering gear bolts to it first, and those get torqued to 15 foot-pounds plus a 1/4 turn, and then putting all the 13/16 large bolts in, and those go to 74 foot-pounds plus a 1/4 turn. I reinstall the dog bone mount. The two bolts here and here go to 15 foot-pounds plus a 1/4 turn, and these are 30 foot-pounds plus a 1/4 turn. So from there, it was just no torque specs, just tightening down the cable shifter, putting back together the battery, the airbox, and then it drives. You probably need an alignment after messing with both the toe-in and the camber, but after that, yeah, the project's done. She's driving. Hope you enjoyed the video.